Okay, so this is the quote. Brethren, do our years last? They slip away day by day. Those which were no longer are. Those to come are not yet here. The former are past. The latter will come only to pass away in their turn. Today exists only in the moment in which we speak. Its first hours have passed. The remainder do not yet exist. They will come, but only fall into nothingness. Nothing contains constancy in itself. The body does not possess being. It has no permanence. It changes with age. It changes with time and place. It changes with illness and accident. The stars have little constancy. They change in hidden ways. They go whirling through space. They are not steady. They do not possess being. Nor is the human heart any more constant. How many thoughts disturb it? How many ambitions? How many pleasures draw it this way and that, tearing it apart? The human spirit itself, although endowed with reason, changes. It does not possess being. It wills and does not will. It knows and does not know. It remembers and forgets. No one has in himself the unity of being. After so many sufferings, diseases, troubles and pains, let us return humbly to that one being. Let us enter into that city whose inhabitants share in being itself. Now it's interesting when we look at the whole world of appearances, everything dies. Everything that comes into existence in terms of appearance disappears. And so, and for Vedanta, the distinction between what's moving and what's not moving is vitally important. Because, you see, most people try to find your video's not on, John. Most people, hey, I've just read them that quote by St. Augustine that I read to you this morning. So what we have, one of the fundamental important distinctions between Vedanta and its distinctions made in Vedanta is what doesn't change and move and what is. And it's an extremely important one because when we are lost in identification, we're caught up in the movement of the universe. In other words, we're identifying with factors in the universe. Now, what's interesting about Dayananda, he considered our thoughts and feelings also part of the movement of the universe, and it just simply moves according to laws. So what we're faced with is facing a world that's constantly moving. And the thing is that Swami Dayananda defines samsara is this relentless pursuit or compulsive desire to try and find happiness and security where it's not. So when we are looking to the world of changing appearances for security, if everything's unstable and everything dies, how secure is it? It's not very secure at all. We forget that and we repress that idea too because we find it so frightening. We kind of we kind of get used to it. But the interesting thing about that quote is all about taking refuge in being, isn't it? Or taking, refuge in what Dayananda calls resting in the lap of Ishvara. Now, you might wonder, well, what's so important about that? Now, the fact of the matter is that what we need to see is that everything is moving. And once you know that, you won't get upset or you won't get, once you see everything as this universe, that this universe is always functioning and its functioning is in complete conformity with the intelligent arrangement it is, you're not going to get upset about what thoughts and feelings come and go, because they're part of the moving universe, and those thoughts and feelings operate according to laws. They are not yours. They are feelings you're having, but they're not you. So everything you're looking at, if you can look at something and it's moving, that's part of the physical universe. Are we all agreed on that?
Yes.
The world of appearances. Now, when you're upset, so what happens is, here we are, we're facing this world of appearances, and they consist of 4 categories. There are appearances that we like. There are appearances that are more than what we like. There are appearances that we don't like, and there's appearances that are the opposite to what we like. This is never going to change. No spiritual teaching is suddenly going to go, oh, you're going to be completely free of any experience you dislike. Some experiences, you're never going to go, oh my God, my wife has just died, I feel so fantastic. It's just not, it's ridiculous. So what happens is, everything in this universe is moving. Now, Swami Dayananda has this beautiful saying, yoga is sameness. Yoga is sameness. Now, if in the face of these changing experiences, have you noticed that you chop and change? So someone says something nice to you, you go, yes. And something happens that you don't like, and you go, oh no. So what happens is, these appearances that are constantly changing are determining what you're being, what you're actually being. Now, I'll give you an example of this. For Dayananda, the anger is an attitude, for example. In other words, an attitude is a way of being that affects every single aspect of your being in the world. Every single aspect. So if I'm angry, my facial expression is like this, right? My breathing is rather strained. My fists are like that, right? You see how when you're in an attitude, every aspect of you is involved in that attitude. Can you all see that? But this attitude is a product of the functioning of the universe. Something's happened and bang. Okay? So this attitude has been triggered, comes into existence as a sense of identity called I am angry. I even say, I am angry. In other words, my being in life and the anger are one and the same. Who's ever had that experience? That my being in life is anger. My being in life is boredom. My being in life is elation. My being in life is emptiness. My being in life is loneliness. Who's ever chopped and changed in life? Right? So we're constantly chopping and changing. Now, if I'm constantly chopping and changing in relation to what's happened, am I being free? Am I being free? Now that's interesting, isn't it? Now, when we go back to the quote by Augustine, what we're talking about is being able to take refuge in being. To take refuge in being. Now, one of the fundamental principles of Vedanta, and the way Dayananda talked about it, is what is the content of the word I? What is the content of the word I? And the content of the word I is the life, light, and fullness that is God. That's the content. So my life in reality and the life and reality that is God is one and the same. That's a fundamental Vedantic principle. So we have a oneness with God that we don't necessarily recognize, right? Now, and so the whole question is well, where do we find this sameness? Where do you find the sameness? Now, it's really important to understand that sameness doesn't mean I never get upset, I never have any psychological reactions. This is the greatest thing about Dayananda. You're going to have psychological reactions. For Dayananda, psychological reactions, if they remain simply as appearances that you're alive to, are not a problem. The problem is when you lose yourself in them, when you become the reaction. The reaction itself is part of the functioning order that's perfectly in keeping with the intelligent arrangement it is. So when we're looking at this is always true. Every single instant in your life, this is always true. You are looking at the functioning universe, which is functioning in such a way that it's perfectly in conformity with the intelligent arrangement it is. You are not causing it. So when your wife or husband says or does something you don't like and you have a strong reaction, you are not to blame for the reaction. It says nothing about you. It says something about the psychological order that is in you. But it says nothing about you. Now, so this is really important because when we're talking about remaining the same, it would be a bad mistake to think I've got to keep my mind calm and still. Who's ever been into that? Who's ever tried that one? I'm going to keep my mind calm and still, right? That's like looking at the weather going, right, those bloody clouds shouldn't be there, right? But they're there. So what we're talking about remaining the same in the face of every appearance, including my thoughts and feelings. Are we all clear on that? So what we need to do is we need to know what does it mean to remain the same. Now you can only remain the same. Now this is where it gets cute. And I'm going to put this in religious terms because I'm a bit of a bhakta, I admit it. I'm a bhakta, right? Okay? I'm not a yani, right? Now, remember what Augustine said, return to being, right? Now, Swami Dayananda says, bring your mind to yourself and think of no other thing. And he said that when you come to yourself, an appointment with yourself is an appointment with the Lord. Now, can you imagine that? An appointment with yourself is an appointment with your Lord. Now, religiously, we can put it this way. That when we come back to ourself as given, the sense of life and being, which is here, it's not some far away, one day I'm going to get moksha and all that nonsense, right? When I come back to this sense of my life and being that is given, God gives me his life as mine, as my life. You with me? So, and that's given. All right, so the whole point is, now, normally speaking, we never arrive back to ourselves as we are, a sense of ourselves as given. We think about ourselves. We think about ourselves. We think about this person we take ourselves to be, and we're either very impressed with what we look at, or we're unhappy because we want to be impressed about what we're looking at, but we can't be impressed with it, so we're self-hating. Okay, or we're very unhappy with it. And the only reason we're impressed with ourselves and what we're looking at is that we've avoided the opposite. That's all. So the thing is that, so this is the structure of self-dissatisfaction. I hate being what I'm like. Okay, which is the usual thing. Why do I feel so wonderful when someone praises me? The only reason I do is because deep down, I feel like I'm very unpraiseworthy. That's why I love being praised. I mean, I wouldn't care about it if the self-hatred wasn't lurking there, you couldn't do it, you couldn't touch me. Okay, so my feeling good about myself or my feeling arrogant underneath is this unconscious self-dissatisfaction. Now, what's interesting here is this. Now, Swami Dayananda says this coming back to yourself as you are, coming back to yourself as you are and thinking of no other thing, he said this is the supreme action. He said it's the supreme action. Now, why is it the supreme action? Because when we come back to ourselves at any one moment, right here, right now, as I am, and I come back to the sense of myself that's given, whatever that form it's in, because does the clay pot have to change its form to change its form in order to appreciate clay? When you're looking at an ocean, it's got rough waves. Can you still see the water? And you can only see the water in the form of rough waves or in the form of smooth waves. So this sense of life and being is not me thinking about myself. It's actually here. It's and the thing is that when we are, our whole point is to learn what Ramana Maharshi had an interesting term called self-abidence. Who's ever heard of that? Self-abidence, abidance in self, right? Okay, that doesn't mean I'm abiding in some higher spiritual self. It's ridiculous. I'm just abiding as myself. Because when I'm abiding as myself, I'm abiding in God. Isn't it amazing? An appointment with myself is an appointment with God. Now, we're just going to do this for a minute. We're just going to come back. And what we're going to do is I just want you to bring your attention back to yourself as you are. Bring it back here. Just do as you are. The actual feel of your being, the feel of your being, the sense of your being that is given. Not what you think. It's got nothing to do with thinking about yourself. When you're thinking about yourself, you're caught up in imagination and it's not real. You're looking at a snake and then you're having reactions about the snake, by the way. When you look at a snake, do you have psychophysical reactions? Of course you do. Because when we project notions, every notion we have, once it gets triggered, has a whole psychophysical response that goes with it. So we're going to come back. So just come back here now. And we're just going to remain with the sense of ourselves that's given, this life and being that is presenting itself here, now, as I am. Okay, just do that. Now, you'll notice that when you did that, it was natural, wasn't it? But who noticed that they found themselves being still, unmoving? But everything else was moving. Thoughts are moving. The feeling you had about sitting here, that was moving. Everything moves. Get this, everything moves. But when you take refuge in being, that's unmoving. This is Vedanta 101, isn't it? Yeah. That's unmoving. Now, but here's the thing. We want to establish ourselves in being while we're living. Does that make sense? Because if we're not in being, you cannot remain the same. Now, you can have all sorts of wonderful thoughts that your consciousness and awareness and all that stuff, you read the Facebook posts, everyone's full of that one, right? So the fact of the matter is that we want to learn, we want to know, and we want to learn to live our life while resting in being. We want to rest in being while we're doing the dishes. We want to rest in being while we're going to the toilet. We want to rest in being when we're talking to our spouse. Are we all clear here? What we want to do is we want to remain the same. In other words, that's silent. You don't notice that you were being silent, but you weren't trying to be silent. You don't have, when you're being yourself, you don't have to try to be silent, and you don't have to be aware. Because when you're being, Sata's chip, you remember we discussed that last time. And also there's the awareness includes everything because it's without limits. It's not restricted but with an adjective. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm this. There's no self-description involved, is there? Okay? You're not being a self, you're being yourself. And you're only being yourself in being. Are we all clear on that one? I mean, this is really basic, but it's very, very important. Now, guess what we're going to do then? What we're going to do is this. We understand through the grace of the teaching that our heart longs to rest in God. That's our heart. We have the striving for moksha, the striving for the absolute. And so what happens is we have the striving. The only thing that satisfies this longing is God itself. The presence of being itself. Now, who here, when you were just with yourself, remaining with yourself there like that, just being yourself, being with yourself because you understand, hey, when I'm being with myself, I'm being with God. Good deal, isn't it? It's a good deal, isn't it? Hey? Okay?
Good deal.
So, what was I going to say? Hold it. Hold it. I've just had a senior moment. Just a minute. So what I want to be able to do is I want to establish myself. I want to establish myself in being while I live my life. Now, this is an interesting thing. What is the definition of moksha? What's the definition of moksha? Oh, yeah, no, I remember. When you were just with yourself, were you having a notion, oh my God, am I so good spiritually? I cannot believe this. I'm so aware that I'm consciousness. Did you have any of that nonsense? Of course you didn't. Because there's no self-objectification. There's no ego satisfaction. None. That's why this desire for God, this desire, which when we look at the transient nature of life, the fragility of it, when we understand our helplessness before it, does that make sense? I'm not talking about helplessness in terms of conduct. People who are very capable in terms of function tend not to recognize their helplessness because I'm not helpless. Well, in terms of function, they're not helpless. But they're helpless in terms of their being. Okay? So there's no ego satisfaction and there's no ego in deflation or inflation. So this does not satisfy pleasure or pain. So in terms of pleasure and pain, it's nothing. It's not even relevant. But because we have built into our heart a longing for God. In other words, we can't feel comfortable being lost in an imaginary, untruthful, egoic life separate and apart from God. We can never be happy as that. Does that make sense? The only place we can find refuge is in God. Now, we know what the definition of moksha is. It's freedom while living. Isn't that interesting? Freedom while living. The living's the verb, right? It's what we do. Now, how many people here are living? Quite a few. Right? You're all living. But the thing is this, you can engage in the living, without any sense of being. You can just be lost in the story. You can just be living a mindless life of imagination where you are in contact with nothing real. Now, this is important to understand because one of the most profound things that Swami Dayananda said, as far as I am concerned, was this. Someone said to him, Swamiji, what's the meaning of life? Classic dialogue between the guru and the thing. And Dayananda said, well, The meaning of life, of course, is to live. How Zen is that? Okay. He says the meaning of life is to live. He says, but, he said, what do we mean by living? He said, you are only living when you're alive to facts. You get that? You are only living when you're alive. Now, who noticed that when you come back to yourself and you were just simply being, you weren't being this or that, you were being as you are, being. It's like the clay pot, just being clay in the form of that the form is taking. Who noticed you become alive to facts? Who noticed that? Isn't it amazing? Because to be is to be aware. And remember, so what happens is when we're embraced by being, we participate in the life, light, and fullness that is God. Okay? The life that is God becomes our life. That's why it's non-dual. Okay? Now, so we need a way of life. So we need to take this understanding. Okay, so I want to live. Now, notice, by the way, when you were just with yourself, which is when you're with yourself, you're also with God. Okay? There's not two here in that sense. So when you're with yourself, and being yourself, you can be yourself in the face of changing experiences. Does that make sense? And this is what Swami Dayananda means by yoga. Okay, sameness. Now, would it be a good idea to establish ourselves in this? To use life to establish, to use my daily life to establish myself in this more and more unshakably. Would that be a good idea? And this is the whole point. This is the whole point of karma yoga. You see, if I don't live this wisdom, and what's the wisdom? That right here, right now, as I am, is the presence of God. In fact, that's all it's here. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm confronting those four categories of experience on a daily basis. Is that true? Right? Now, remember, I'm not interested in the stupid thing of trying to keep my mind quiet. Okay? I don't care about that. But what I want to do is be alive to facts. How do I become alive to facts? By being myself. How do I become being myself? When there's no resistance to anything, I am myself. In acceptance, I'm being myself. That's another aspect of Dayananda's teaching, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wisdom and I'm going to live this wisdom in the marketplace. I'm going to learn to remain the same in the face of whatever is happening. Are we clear on what we're doing here? Are we clear on what we're doing here?
Yeah.
Because without this, I can say, yes, I'm consciousness and all that stuff. But if I'm not remaining as the unmoving, if you like, if I don't know what it means to remain in being, because when I'm in being, I'm being conscious, aren't I? Now, I might at this stage being conscious of, or being consciousness itself. I don't go into that, but the fact of the matter is, spiritual life can become very self-deceptive unless I understand that what I want, what I long for is moksha, the absolute, right? Moksha is the life, light, and fullness that is God. Now, the teaching says that life, light, and fullness that is God is not away from you, is it? Vedanta 101. Yeah, Kevin.
When you say use your daily life, your daily activities to establish yourself in yoga or sameness, the way to do that seems to be that as the changing appearances unfold, and I necessarily will have, psychological changes in myself, things I don't like, whatever. The way to deal with that is just to stay with, not resist or reject or try and fix it up with my thinking or thoughts. Is just to remain with the feel of myself,
which is the feel of your
no resistance.
Yeah, when you are rooted in the life and being you are rooted in the life and being that is God. And that you have to have that understanding. Otherwise, you see. So what happens is, right? Okay, let's just look at it practically, right? I notice, who's ever, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you feel a kind of maybe a darkness, just a little bit of a niggle. Who's ever felt that? Just a little bit of self-dissatisfaction, right? Now, believe it or not, you're feeling niggly because you're resisting it. There's a resistor and a resisted. You've always got that structure of subjectivity. But the moment, so what we're living is we're living the attitude that is born out of this understanding of God. In other words, when I'm rooted in being, I have an attitude of feeling composed, free, and at home. Is that true?
Yes.
That's what. Now this attitude doesn't come from my ignorance or my past experiences. Normally, the attitudes I'm in are the result of the past. Coming alive in me today as an attitude, an angry attitude, a sad attitude, an empty attitude, a blank attitude, whatever. Right? So it's so important that we learn to face life, be alive to whatever's here. So we're definitely not trying to become something. You know the difference in Vedanta between becoming and being? Being is abidingly present. If we take refuge in being, we learn to relax into being. So we're being ourselves. Get this. We're simply being ourselves while we do the dishes, while we talk to people, while we're walking down the hallway. Now, the moment I notice I'm feeling a little bit niggly, I go, that's a recognition. I'm feeling niggly. And then that very recognition is the light of awareness showing me I'm a little bit niggly. And I just remain. I don't resist. I don't try and think it out. None of that. I'm interested in living this vision. In other words, I'm going to remain simply myself in the face of that experience of niggliness. And you'll find that as soon as you come back to yourself as you are, you kind of just go, you don't care that you're feeling niggly. It's just not a problem. You're just feeling niggly. You're alive to the fact that you're feeling niggly, and you remain the same in the face of it. Are we clear here?
Yes.
We're not doing something to ourselves. Yep.
Because that's normally when we do feel that niggly feeling or sense of dissatisfaction. I get busy thinking mode how to fix myself up, but that means that I can't possibly be aware of being when I'm in my thinking processes.
That's right. But you will become aware of self-dissatisfaction more and more with this, but you won't, because you won't resist it. You're quite willing to remain yourself in the face of whatever experience is happening. Does that make sense? The more you do this, the more you'll be willing to do it. So what happens is because you understand that to remain with yourself as you are is to remain with God, and this sense of life and being, where does that come from? It's given, isn't it? The sense of your life and being that's here. Because it's here, I'm seeing it. That's what Dayananda meant by objectivity. So the whole point of karma yoga is two things. First, it's the resolution of binding desires. We cannot resolve the binding desires unless we let the light of awareness reveal our psychological misery, which is abidingly present in the form of fear and self-dissatisfaction. This fear and self-dissatisfaction is normally unconscious. But when you start practicing karma yoga for real, as a commitment, does that make sense? You're living in understanding. You're not trying to do something. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're just simply, when you're just sitting here like this, you just say you're doing the dishes and you're bitting, I hate doing these dishes, right? Okay, now, and you'll find when you start doing this, eventually you won't be able to use the dishes because it won't matter. But the thing is that when someone is saying something that you don't like, a wonderful opportunity, because what you see is you want to establish yourself more and more and take refuge in being. We're all clear on that? So here you are, your wife has said something you don't want, and you just want to say something to fix it up. Who's ever done that? Who's ever felt the urge to say something to fix it up? When you're doing that, you're trying to control the other person so you feel better. Is that resolving the fear and self-dissatisfaction centered on yourself? Absolutely not. But if you don't dramatize, if you just don't dramatize, even though you feel like you don't dramatize, you're thrown back on yourself. Diananda says the whole purpose of karma yoga is to throw yourself back on yourself. So you're thrown back on yourself. It's very unpleasant. It's unpleasant being with myself. Fantastic. Okay? Because now you can resolve that yourself as that self-dissatisfaction into Ishvara, or you can resolve it into the presence of reality if you remain with it. And then what you've done is you've taken a slice of this fear and self-dissatisfaction that drives you to be the personality that you normally are, and you've neutralized it, haven't you? And you can test this out for yourself. You can actually find this place of rest in the face of something that's happened that you don't like. And this is what tests us. It's easy to, oh yes, I like being, it's easy to remain the same. Well, of course it's easy to remain the same when things are going the way you want, right? Right? But who's noticed that there's a lot of things that happen you don't like? And when they happen, you get, so what we're going to do is that we're going to use our pain and suffering as an instruction to come back to Ishvara. And with the light of the understanding is that we do not resolve our fear and self-dissatisfaction through trying to control the world, ourselves, others, or the world. We do what we need to do in terms of duty, in terms of function. We do that. We render to Caesar what Caesar's. But in terms of this, if we don't let ourselves dramatize, and we understand that what I want to do is I want to live in God while I'm living in this life. Who's ever heard that beautiful saying in our Western scriptures, be in the world but not of it? This attitude that comes from our understanding of reality, where we're just simply being the life and being we are, which is being the life and being that is God, by the way, right? Can you see how this is where freedom is? This is the starting point. It's also the end point, by the way. Okay, it's not, we're not talking about something miles away or one day I'm going to get there and all that nonsense, right? Because that's a time process trying to get to the timeless.
Right.
The sense of life and being you are is here. It is not hidden. But when I'm self-dissatisfied and I'm caught up in it, I'm not seeing myself. I'm seeing an idea of myself that I'm taking to be myself. But the moment I remain, so what we're practicing here, is we're not doing what it's what Dayananda says. We first of all need the wisdom. So you understand what I mean by the wisdom. The understanding that to be with myself is to be with God. That's wisdom. Because then I will find that very attractive. Not in terms of pleasure and pain. It's boring by myself, with myself as I am. It's very boring. Of course it's boring. It's not exciting. So what happens is, but the very sense of my life and being as given, it's here, isn't it? You don't have to conjure it up. But then he says, so that's the wisdom. So we understand that. So the wisdom of the teaching, when that wisdom, when that way of seeing, that spiritual way of seeing, that spiritual understanding that tells us, to be with myself as I am is to be with God as he is. When that understanding is active in me, I can't help but be drawn to it, can I? But that's the understanding. Then Dayananda says you have to live the understanding. You have to live the wisdom, right? Living the wisdom is not trying. Do you see how this isn't a trying? I don't have to try to be alive to what's here, because what's here is here. So if what's here is a deep feeling of loneliness and emptiness, who's ever experienced that sometimes? We all have. Okay, this is what happens with human beings because we're cut off from reality, right? So what we do is, as we learn to remain rooted in God in the face of changing experiences, can you see how it'll no longer be an intellectual thing of, oh yes, this consciousness is unmoving and the world's moving and all that stuff, right? Well, that's all very nice, but we need to be able to practically see what it means to remain the same, because this gives us an understanding that consciousness is unmoving, that it doesn't come and go. It's abidingly present. This is practical. This is not, and we will quite honestly see everything is changing all the time. But I'm not upset. I'm not upset when I get lost, because of course I'm going to get lost. Swami Dayananda says something very interesting. He gave the example of a Chinese doll. Who's ever seen those Chinese dolls when you push it over, then it wobbles back? You know what he said? He says, yoga is wobbling. Yoga is wobbling. So you don't care about that. Do you see what I mean? So now there's two things. The more when I'm being myself, I disappear as myself as personality. Can you see that? In our Western scriptures, we talk about dying daily, don't we? Dying daily. So when I'm just walking down the road, or I'm doing the dishes, or I'm doing, and I'm just with myself while I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay? I'm just with myself, with what's, and because with myself is I'm with what I'm doing too. Do you know what I mean? I'm with myself while I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm establishing myself in what he calls discovering a contemplative disposition. Now, when we believe that our security and our happiness is in external things, in other words, mental states that we like, certain ways of, being in a certain physical condition, having certain relationships, having certain money and status, whatever it is that we, when we are passionate about the world, can you see how you're taken away from yourself? Can you see how you're taking away from your life and being, and it's all outwards, right? The whole purpose of karma yoga is to bring us back to yourself. So there's two things. As we deal with the fear and the self-dissatisfaction, we will naturally start to become more and more contemplative. In other words, we will have a disposition to remain with ourselves as ourselves. And ultimately, he said, this is wisdom. If I can remain with myself, and I'm perfectly content without any external things, Swami Dayananda says this is wisdom. So, and this, once we understand what karma yoga is, we won't get caught up in this. Have you seen people say, the neo-Advaita, say, well, you're already consciousness, so there's no spiritual practice? Have you heard that one? You're already what you want to be, so you're trying to be that way. Have you heard that nonsense? Right? We're not talking, we're talking about going into the marketplace with this wisdom and living this wisdom in this turbulent, chopping and changing world, and learning more and more that any form of pain or upset is not going to be dealt with by trying to change or manipulate the world, but every form of upset is going to be handled by us taking refuge in God. Does that make sense? By living in God while we live this life. And when I'm living this attitude, which in formally in Vedanta, it's called graceful acceptance. Have you all heard of that term? Graceful acceptance. So when I'm abiding as graceful acceptance, when I'm just simply being gracefully accepting, so I am being it, I'm not doing it. I'm, you know, graceful. You know, have you seen a ship go through this rough seas, but it's just gracefully smoothing, you know, have you ever seen it, like these sailing boats? It just gracefully negotiates all of that roughness. The important thing about this, an attitude, because it's a psychophysical thing, isn't it? You know, an attitude. It's not, you know, it's not Satchidananda. Okay. It's a way you're being in the world. Can you see how you can live an attitude? That once you become familiar with this attitude of remaining, of being still, remaining the same, relaxed in the lap of Ishvara, graceful, it doesn't matter what you call it. Dayananda called all sorts of things. You know, once he said, okay, so what we want to do is we want to take shelter, take refuge in this attitude, because when I'm living this attitude is born out. It's in our Western scriptures. We have that beautiful saying called, we're a holy offspring of God. In other words, our sense of life and being doesn't come from our psychological past or the functioning of our psychology. The psychology is there. So when I'm looking and I'm doing the dishes and I'm planning the day and all of that sort of stuff. But what I'm learning about is what it means to be free while living. This is the whole game, isn't it? Because we can't do anything about the world. The world, no matter how good we get functionally, there's always going to be limitations. And everybody we know is either going to die, and then we'll die after, or we'll die. Everything dies here. Right? So it's not, and this belief in life, that life can give me happiness, is a delusion. Okay? It's a promise that's never going to be kept. It sounds negative, but it's very important to see this, because the more you see it, the more you will be attracted to what is abidingly present, which doesn't come and go. Our real life. And our real life is only available to us in being. But it's not something far away. So we're just going to do it we're just going to come back here like this. And we're going to just simply remain with this understanding that we just want to remain with being, which is to remain just simply being what I'm like here. And I'm going to just come into conscious contact with the feel of my life and being. Because it's there, I'm seeing it. The sense of the given sense of life and being that's here, which Swami Dayananda opens us our eyes to. It's just here. We don't have to go somewhere. It's here, right now as I am. And we're just going to quietly remain as we are in the face of changing and moving appearances. And we don't care. Our job is not to worry about those appearances. That's God's job. Leave that alone. All we're going to do is remain. And we're just going to do that for a minute. With the understanding that to remain with ourselves is to remain with God. Or to remain with ourselves is to remain with being. Now, what you'll notice is that without any effort or thinking on your part, the presence of the given becomes more evident. Everyone notice that? Anybody didn't notice that? Okay, that is because when you're being yourself, you're also being aware. Being aware being yourself means being aware. Okay, Kevin, what's the thing that stands out to you tonight?
There's so many things, but just one thing that really stood out is that the psychological content, my reactions, thoughts, feelings in response to changing appearances, say nothing about me. It does indicate there's a psychological background from past experiences or whatever. But normally I take that to be my life, and it's also, the other thing that strikes me is just how readily available this is. Like you say, there's no ego inflation in this. It's boring, or no ego, meaning there's no ego inflation, but there's definitely a rest and a peace and a joy. It's not dependent on anything. Everything else, all the appearances become incidental.
Being doesn't fluctuate.
Mm.
And the other thing too is that you're always looking at in front of you, what's happening in front of you, including thoughts and feelings. They're the moving world. It's not. That's Dayananda's understanding of Ishvara. Everything you're looking at is this functioning of the universe, including your thoughts and feelings. Yeah.
It's very radical to say to refer to our thoughts and feelings as just being the function of the universe, because normally we take them as very
mine. They're mine. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's not good. Oh, I'm no good because of that. Yeah. Dayananda says that one of the most profound mistakes is the self-judgment associated with psychological reactions. We judge ourselves on the basis of our psychological reactions.
What's interesting is how readily being aware of being is available once the thinking activity is.
That's why you have to have the spiritual understanding of what it means to rest in the lap of Ishvara, or what it means to abide as yourself, or what it means to rest in being, or what it means to be rooted in being, or what it means to be rooted in reality. It doesn't matter what you call it. But once you understand that, you can then live that, can't you?
Yeah.
Without understanding it, you can't live it. You'll be trying and be making efforts and all that stuff. Very good.
What's interesting is by just ceasing resisting however I am, it just obtains in me this being accepting. I don't do it.
No, being as you actually are is a very natural thing. Yeah, very good. Smita,
Just was more of an observer, noticing the changes that was happening. The thoughts were changing, but something that was constant. And it was like I was just observing those changes without identifying with it or, associating with it. And there was just a sense of calmness, but yet that the feeling of being at home was very much evident.
Yes, you were being a choiceless observer. You weren't using your will, were you, to try and be aware?
No.
The important thing is, it's okay being, but often sometimes what can happen and people go, I'm going to be an observer, right? But it's not like that, is it?
No.
You
It just happens.
That's it. Because being you were being the aliveness to facts itself.
Yeah.
So you weren't being your thinking, your feelings, and and then in that aliveness to facts, things move. Yeah, very good, Asmita. Michelle.
So what actually, popped up for me today is that how impersonal things really are and how personal I make everything to be. That's actually, that's big for me.
I have that problem. That's all our problem. That's precisely right. That's why Dayananda says that the basis of self-acceptance is the understanding of Ishvara. That when you understand that you're always looking at a moving, changing, functioning universe that's perfectly in keeping with the intelligent arrangement it is. Given my psychological background and given my condition, I can't help but be the way I am. Now, that's also the case that when I'm resting in reality, I can't help but be transformed.
Yeah.
That's a rule too. So it's just everything's lawful. When I understand what God is and I take refuge in God, my attitude is going to undergo a transformation. That's just a law. If I'm cut off from God, I can't help but be psychologically miserable and caught in darkness. That's also a law. Yeah. It's not that anyone's punishing me, but it is very punishing being separate from reality. It's a very punishing activity. Yeah, very good. Judy.
I never considered when I was first waking up what was going on was a byproduct of stuff. And that is something that allows me to recognize that the tone of the day is determined not by that stuff, but by my recognition that that stuff is there, like just to be with it, but not to become it.
Yeah.
And that was really insightful because I never ever started my day that way. So that changes my day.
Yeah. So to be in communion with what is to be in communion with God. To be in communion with the given is to be in communion with God, irrespective of the form that given is.
Right.
That's the whole point. The presence of the given is the presence of the giver. And Swami Dayananda says a prayerful attitude is two things: the understanding that everything is given and the awareness of the presence of the giver. So this is something you can prayerfully go about your life.
Right. And I think it's also this understanding of what we just said, something about making everything personal when it's all impersonal, and that it's not huge. Like it only becomes huge. Everything only becomes this large thing when it becomes personal. Otherwise, it's just the ebb and flow of life unfolding. And we're just this little tiny speck in it.
Life doesn't actually ebb and flow. Actually, the fact of the matter is that when you're rooted in reality, right? that rootedness takes to the foreground and the appearances aren't as important. That's what they mean by dispassion. The more you love being rooted in reality, the less you'll love the world. You won't have the passion for the world, and that gives you rest. So the accent is on the restfulness, if you like, or remaining the same in the face of the changing. Because Satchitananda itself is life, not this moving stuff.
Right, this peace, this presence of being. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Very good. Very good, Judy. Robert, the lawyer. I can't hear you, Robert.
So yeah, just this really helpful clarification of the difference between thinking about and just allowing the vision to operate, or to keeping it really, really simple by just being.
That's it, just being. So you're abiding in, that's that beautiful saying in our Western scriptures, God is love, those who are abiding in God are abiding in, and God is abiding in them. You know, and that other one that I like, in him we live, move, and have our being. It's a different, it's a different life while we're living this one. Normally, so we're doing the same thing as everybody else, except that there's this additional element of being. We're taking refuge in being, and we're learning more and more to take refuge in being. And the more we take refuge in being, the more we get called back. Does that make sense? We get yanked back.
So the more we can what?
The more we take refuge in being, the more we get called back. So when we fall away from it, it'll solicit us. Come back here. Come back here.
Right. Thank you.
Good. Amelia.
There was a lovely space between thoughts and what was going on. There was a peace that was there in just being in myself that way.
Very, very good. And Diana actually said that what we want to do is create a distance between ourselves and our reactions. Mm-hmm. And the way we do that, when we're being the reactions, there's no distance because we're being the reactions. I am angry. When I'm being myself, that's actually freedom from reactions. That creates the distance, actually. Isn't that strange? Isn't it strange? Okay, very good. John.
Well, I woke up this morning, and usually the first thought is, well, what am I going to do?
Yep.
But this morning, I woke up, and as a result of our conversation, I rested in being. And it wasn't that I remembered myself. Yeah. I was remembered.
Quite. God's always trying to intrude in on us, John. And it appears that the divine intention is to give us his life as our life.
Well, that doesn't sound like a bad idea.
No, well, it's a lot better than our life that we think that we have, yes.
Yes.
The life of me, Bede, I, and myself.
And these words, take refuge or abide in, they take me home.
You see that? Now that's very interesting, John. Notice how the very understanding of what it means to abide takes you to the abidance.
Yes.
That's what Swami Dayananda talked about, knowledge or wisdom. That in our Western tradition, we have that saying, what does it say? It says that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God.
Yes.
When God's presence obtains in us as spiritual understanding, it's a very wonderful thing, because that understanding just, like the understanding of abidance, for example, to what it means to abide in reality, that very understanding takes you to it, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's not this calculative, what I need to do here.
There's a great freedom in that.
There is. That's why Dayananda thought that knowledge is, what he means by knowledge is this wisdom from above that obtains as my way of understanding, my way of seeing, because it's not dualistic, but I understand where God is. That's an understanding, isn't it? Where being is. And then we can live that understanding, so it's not all complicated and all that stuff. Very good. Now, what I did was, I certainly hope that I sent Andre that an invite, but I'm not sure whether I did it or not. But anyway, I made a guided meditation, which is based on what we're talking about here. It's 32 minutes, and what I'll do is I'll send it to you guys, so you can. It'll just sort of make, it's all about this becoming more and more familiar with just simply being with ourselves as we are, in the light of this spiritual understanding of what God is. All right? But for this week, really, really understand that the way Swami Dayananda sees karma yoga is that what we're doing is we're practicing living, being free. Does that make sense? We're practicing a way of living which is free. Because, and we can validate it for ourselves existentially, because we'll find that we can remain the same. And remember what I mean by remaining the same? Being alive to what is. So it's nothing to do with keeping my mind still and all that nonsense, right? It's remaining the same, rooted in reality, while the storm and the fluctuating experiences and the coming and going of this, that, and the other thing, we're learning to remain the same. This will give us a very strong a sense of appreciation of the life and being we really are. Can't help it, because the life and being we really are doesn't chop and change. It's non-dimensional. And we can only be what we're like. Be this. It's not a dualistic knowledge. I know that. All right. Well, thank you very, very much. Look after yourself. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a great week,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bede.